Tonight, we will preview the first presidential debate, plus a closer look at first-time voting, and some insight on Islamophobia and the recent New York City bombing. You're watching Talking Points. Welcome to the September 22nd edition of Talking Points. I'm your host, Alex Amico, and here are tonight's top Talking Points. A man shot during riots in Charlotte is dead. The killing of Keith Lamont Scott sparked the chaotic protests. Scott was shot by police who claim he was holding a gun. Police officials say they plan not to release the dashcam video of the shooting. Police Chief Kerr Putney said the video will not provide, quote, definitive visual evidence of Scott pulling a weapon. Donald Trump Jr. is facing criticism after he compared Syrian refugees to candy in a tweet. Trump Jr. posted a photo of a bowl of Skittles asking, quote, if 3 of these could kill you, would you take a handful? Commenters called him out for his analogy of human beings to candy. Ironically, the photographer of the Skittles, David Kiddos, was a refugee. Kiddos said the photo was used without his permission. Yahoo announced today that millions of their email accounts were breached in 2014. Roughly 500 million Yahoo accounts in total were breached. The company says they believe the cyber attack could be state-sponsored. Information stolen includes phone numbers, birthdays, and some encrypted security questions. The Yahoo breach is thought to be one of the largest hackings in terms of accounts affected. 2 former aides of Governor Andrew Cuomo are facing corruption charges. The aides, Joseph Parocco and Todd Howe, were accused of furnishing state funds in areas in upstate New York. The purpose was to bring in more businesses into the area to boost the upstate New York economy. Throughout the course of the election, union endorsements are earned by one candidate or the other. But what do they mean and what political capital do they have? Here to tell us more about how these types of endorsements are impacting the race is Talking Points political correspondent Josh Carney. Josh, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
So, unions in politics. Let's talk about what unions are and how do they function politically.
Right. Unions are groups based on similar association, whether it's textile industry, car industry, firefighters, or police officers. They function pretty democratically, and they're pretty much on the basis of just providing a political influence and a political cause for those that can sometimes feel alienated or small in that regard.
And in terms of their support for various parties, various candidates, talk a little bit about how they line up.
Right. So it's gone from about 38% with President Bush and 95% with Kerry in the 2004 cycle to around 67% and with Obama and 30% with McCain in 2008. And their spending has almost doubled in a span of 10 years, from 96 to 2004 cycle. It went from $500 to $925 million spent. So they lean heavily Democratic, they spend heavily Democratic, and they have a tremendous amount of influence, especially in metropolitan areas.
And my great uncle was in the United Auto Workers up in Connecticut, and he told me that back in, it was like 40s and 50s, in his local, if they found out one of the officers voted for a Republican, they would call an emergency meeting and vote him out of office. But anyway,
right.
this election, what candidate has the edge in union endorsements?
Well, it's actually shaping up pretty interestingly. You see Trump picking up a large portion of civil service, being police officers, firefighters, and those particular unions, and then those who are in increasingly diminishing job markets, whether it's textiles or manufacturing, are leaning heavily Democratic. So it's actually a split between pretty much law enforcement and everyone else. And it's creating actually a pretty strict and more or less even divide amongst the candidates.
Josh Carney, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Here at Talking Points, we spend a lot of time discussing the upcoming presidential election, but not how to actually register to vote. Our own Jamie Weiss discovered that for many Central New York residents, this election will be their first chance to voice their vote.
Election Day is less than 2 months away, and in Central New York, hundreds of first-time voters are beginning to register. Central New York native Jordan Lally was inspired by Vice President Joe Biden's visit to SU and learned that the county matters when registering to vote.
I would have had to submit an absentee ballot because I'm from Cayuga County, and this is Onondaga County. So I didn't vote in the primaries because I didn't know that soon enough. The absentee ballot was an online process, very easy, just a form to fill out. Send it in and wait a couple days and you'll get a notification that your address has changed or that your ballot has come in.
Central New Yorkers are able to register to vote both online, through the mail, and right here at the Onondaga County Board of Elections. Onondaga County Board of Elections Commissioner Dustin Zarni expects voter turnout to increase this year because of the presidential election. Zarni told me he hopes to see voters of all ages and demographics on Election Day.
My mission here is to make sure they get out and vote. Who they vote for is their business. In fact, that's one of our major tenets here at the Board of Elections, is to make sure we protect the anonymity of the vote.
Commissioner Zarni has even visited the Hill to try and recruit first-time voters. As it turns out, the right to vote is motivation enough for Republican Cole Zimmerman.
Having the right to vote is an extremely awesome thing that we have as Americans, and people fight and die for our right to vote. It's almost going to be kind of historic in a sense, because I don't know if during our lifetimes there will ever be another eccentric election like the one that we have now with Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. So I think it'll be cool to say in the future that this was the first election I got to vote in.
First-time voters must register by October 14th, and Onondaga County absentee ballots are accepted until November 7th.
What's great about elections is that there's another one in just a couple of years. As an American, I'm going to stay and fight. I'm going to stay and work for my values to be reflected in the next election.
In Onondaga County, Jamie Weiss, Citrus TV News.
Election Day is even closer than you think. Starting tomorrow, Minnesotans will be able to cast absentee ballots and vote more than a month before Election Day. A week from today, Iowans will be able to do the same. Every decision the candidates make now is crucial, especially as we approach a make-or-break event for both campaigns. This Monday, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump will face off for the first time in a presidential debate. Here to tell us how this debate could change the race is Talking Points elections correspondent Dan Prager. Dan, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So let's talk about what's at stake with this debate. What's on the line for both candidates?
So really, there's a lot at stake. Both candidates, this is the first time they'll be meeting and going face to face, and about 75% of likely voters will be watching. It's really important that they show a good image of themselves and show their opponents in a negative light, because it could really affect how undecided voters are thinking.
And so in terms of their strategy, what are they planning on doing in terms of engaging with one another?
So Clinton's strategy is really what she's been doing all along: make Trump seem unprepared, unqualified, and bigoted, and like a con artist. But her real strategy is to make him do it himself. She's going to want to fluster him and make him kind of revert to the more controversial things he usually says when he's not on prompter. To do this, she's really been taking her time and preparing a lot. She's watched tape of him, she's read books, she's looked at Ted Cruz, who did a great job of that in the primaries, and she's taken off a lot of time. She's only stopped at 2 campaign stops this week, and it really shows. Trump was needling her a bit before. But Trump, on the other hand, he's really not doing nearly as much. He has this aversion to mock debates that his campaign staff is a little worried about, because he's not preparing. He's kind of going off the cuff here, and which is what he did during the primary debates, and it worked, which is why he thinks he'll be safe. But we don't really know what he's going to try and do. He could be more moderate. He could just revert back to what he's been doing and try and say wild and controversial things. We don't really know.
And so you're talking about how Trump debated during the primaries. Also during the primaries, he criticized debates. He criticized them before, after, sometimes during. He even skipped one of the debates. How is this debate similar to those primary debates?
So it's very similar. Trump's already given himself a way out of these debates. He's criticized them a lot. He says debates shouldn't have moderators. And he's criticized Lester Holt, who's going to be hosting it on Monday. He says, and I quote, "Lester is a professional, but we'll see what happens. By the way, Lester's a Democrat. They're all Democrats. The system is very unfair." So he's kind of giving himself a way out, saying, if I lose this debate, it's because they're Democrats, it's because they're all against me, and it's kind of riling up his base so nobody will stop supporting him.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, and it is worth noting that according to New York voting records, Lester Holt is a registered Republican. But in terms of Hillary Clinton, this last week she saw, it was really bad. It was a bad couple weeks for Hillary Clinton in terms of her poll numbers. What does this mean for her campaign? Is this a bump in the road, or is this the beginning of the end?
So it is really bad for her, because this is the closest she's been to Trump in a long time. But at the same time, last week was a really bad week for her. The Clinton Foundation was all over the news, her health concerns. This week, however, was a really bad week for Trump. The Trump Foundation is taking a lot of fire, and George H.W. Bush just came out in support of Hillary Clinton. He didn't actually come out, but he said he was voting for her. Now, so the polls should probably go back from what we've seen. When Trump dominates the polls, his numbers go down. But at the same time, this debate could be a huge reset button and could really just change the pace of the campaign going forward.
Well, we'll see what happens. Dan Prager, thank you for joining us. Coming up next, an examination of the new foreign aid package for Israel, plus a look at a North Carolina pipeline. Don't go away.
You've messed up your son's haircut.
Mom?
Do you A, try to fix it,
Like it never happened.
B, work with what you got, or C, show solidarity?
Thank you, baby.
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
The U.S. is pledging $38 million in military aid to Israel over the next 10 years, and it's generating some controversy. It's the largest aid deal in U.S. history, with an additional $8 million that tops the current decade-long deal with Israel that's set to expire in 2018. But no one seems happy. Israel and Republicans think it's too little, and Democrats think it's too much. Questions are being raised about the conditions, implications, and fairness of the deal by those on both sides of the aisle as the November election nears. And it calls for a bigger conversation about the nature of U.S. foreign aid. Who else receives it, and what for? Talking Points international correspondent Tom Austin is here to break it all down. Tom, thank you for joining us.
Good to see you, Alex.
So, looking at this specific deal with Israel, what are the arguments surrounding this foreign aid package?
Well, it's interesting. As you said, it's kind of devolving into a partisan battle. On one side, you have the Democrats who say, for one, it's the sheer amount of the aid is just too much, that Israel doesn't need as much as they're getting. But also, there's a practical take that they're kind of pursuing in that, before, a lot of the aid that goes to Israel was attached with certain incentives, certain strategic moves that Israel was supposed to make. One example was when Israel was engaging in Egypt, they were told that they would get more aid if they moved through with the Camp David agreement and everything like that. Nowadays, you don't see that, and the aid's still going up.
And so, in terms of the conditions of this package,
yes,
what sort of conditions are in there to advance American interests with
well,
Israel?
For American interests, one clause that was just written in was that all the aid that Israel receives has to be spent on U.S. defense contractors, whereas before Israel could use 26% of the aid to spend it on their own contractors. Another thing is that Israel can no longer lobby in Congress for their missile defense program. And these two clauses, these two conditions, make it more in line with other foreign aid package deals that the U.S. engages with.
So that's this specific aid package with Israel. Tell us a little bit about other foreign aid packages with other countries. What do they entail? What goes into them? Talk a little about them.
Yeah, so the U.S. Obviously is a big player in the foreign aid sector worldwide, and they fund a lot of different places for a lot of different things. The majority of their funding goes towards Israel and Egypt for peace and security. Some of their funding also goes for democracy and human rights in places like Afghanistan or South Sudan. And in Southern Africa, they're funding a lot of health initiatives, and that's something that they've been funding more, and that they plan to fund more of in 2017. Now, with all of those packages, there are certain conditions, and they're conditions unique to the place. Now, one thing I didn't mention was Mexico, but for a foreign aid package with Mexico, they have to maintain a certain degree of human rights standards that they have to maintain. And if they don't get the foreign aid. In a place like Pakistan, if they're engaging in counterterrorism efforts, they have to tell the U.S. what their strategy is. Otherwise, they're not getting the aid. Those type of conditions are things that the U.S. puts on these other countries so they can get the aid.
Tom Austin, thank you for your insight. And now to check in on some environmental news. Nearly 2 weeks ago, Colonial Pipeline Company had a 338,000-gallon spill from a major line that runs from Houston to New York. As a result, the Southeast has been experiencing price spikes and fuel shortages at gas stations, and the governors of Alabama, Georgia, and North Carolina have declared states of emergency. Here with more is Talking Points contributor Joey Lino.
Line 1 of the pipeline was shut down on Friday, September 9th, 20 minutes after workers were alerted of a potential spill. The leak occurred just south of Birmingham. Line 1 carries 1.3 million barrels of oil every day and is responsible for 40% of the gasoline on the East Coast. From an environmental perspective, the company was really lucky. Most of the leak went into a water retention pond of an old coal mine nearby. As was put by James Pinkney, spokesman for the EPA, "You really couldn't have planned it any better than this. There are no homes nearby and it's fully contained. It's so fortunate." The real impact this leak has had is on those who consume gasoline in the Southeast. Alternative methods of getting gas to the affected states are more expensive than pipelines, creating price spikes of 15 to 20 cents in some places, as well as long lines and even stations running entirely out of gas. There have also been instances of price gouging. A North Carolina resident told me she saw a station raise their price 79 cents in one day. The emergency declarations by the governors relaxed federal regulations on drivers and vehicles to make it easier to get gas to affected areas. However, even if alternative transportation methods can meet the demand, worried drivers rushing to fill up can create gas shortages all on their own. Colonial Pipeline should have a bypass line up and running this week, and gas supply in the Southeast should return to normal a few days after that. Alex?
Joey, thank you very much. Earlier this week, a 45-foot sinkhole in central Florida leaked over 200 gallons of slightly radioactive water into a local aquifer. The now contaminated water supply is part of one of the highest producing aquifers in the world, providing water to areas across 4 southern states. While the company that runs the plant where the sinkhole is located knew about the leakage on August 27th, the public was not notified until late last week. Here with more information is Talking Points contributor Galat Malamed.
When the Mosaic Company found out that the sinkhole on their fertilizer plant property leaked into a local aquifer, it was quick to notify government oversight agencies. It was not, however, quick to notify the public. That took nearly 3 weeks. Under Florida state law, a company is not required to notify anyone until there's some sign the pollution has spread outside the property where it went into the aquifer. Under this law, the Mosaic Company legally did not commit any wrongs by waiting. The current law allows a company 10 days to notify the DEP if contamination spread off their property, and then the DEP has an entire 30 days before needing to notify the surrounding residents. The law wasn't always this way, though, only since 2005. While some Florida Democrats, like potential 2018 gubernatorial candidate Gwen Graham, have criticized the state DEP for not acting quickly enough, current Republican Governor Rick Scott said Mosaic has taken responsibility and that the DEP is, quote, working to make sure everybody knows what is going on. It is interesting to note that Scott owns $14,000 worth of stock in the Mosaic Company and has received past campaign contributions from them. While the company has assured residents the water has not migrated off the plant's property, many are still not fully convinced. In an effort to be more proactive, the Mosaic Company has enlisted the help of third-party agencies to conduct free drinking well water testing upon request. While testing is going on, Mosaic is offering free water bottles to residents upon request as well. Not only was this incident part of the bigger environmental issue of sinkholes in Florida, but also the issue of government-to-citizen response time and transparency.
Galat, thank you very much. Up next on Talking Points, an examination of Islamophobia. We'll be back after this.
Hey, look, it's those guys. Are you good to drive?
I'm fine.
How many did you have?
I should be fine.
You should be?
Go and step out of the vehicle for me.
See ya, buddy. Good luck. So turns out, buzz driving and drunk driving, they're the same thing, and it costs around $10,000. So not worth it.
Fancy pants peanut butter? A big screen television? You haven't even bought a sofa yet. A motorcycle? When your father finds out, he's gonna flip his shoes with 2 buckles? What do you even need 2 buckles for? Mr. Big Shot, buying whiskey shots for everybody in the bar. From the looks of it, I'd say nobody even remembers. Feed the pig.
Welcome back. Officials believe they have the main suspect behind the New York City and New Jersey bombings in custody. Ahmed Rahami is suspected of setting off a bomb in Seaside Park, New Jersey before a 5K race Saturday morning. That evening, another bomb went off in the Chelsea section of New York City, injuring 31 people. From there, police discovered and disarmed 5 more devices at a New Jersey train station. Officials launched a manhunt for Rahami after finding his fingerprints on one of those explosives and spotting him on surveillance cameras carrying a duffel bag. Rahami was found sleeping outside a bar in Linden, New Jersey, Monday afternoon. He engaged in a shootout with police. 2 officers were injured, and Rahami suffered several gun wounds, but is now in custody. Here to discuss the developing investigation is national correspondent Sarah Nevin. Sarah, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So Rahami's been arrested. He's hospitalized. But is there any word on what his motive might have been yet?
Yeah, so since he is recovering from surgery, he hasn't been cleared for questioning yet. However, this is being investigated as an act of terrorism, mostly because of his past. In 2014, Rahami's father was interviewed by the FBI because he reported that Rahami might be a terrorist. However, that was dismissed as a domestic dispute. But Rahami also traveled to Afghanistan multiple times in the last 5 years, and he also spent nearly a year in Pakistan. He was questioned upon return, but wasn't really connected to anything terrorist related.
And so the question that always comes up when there's an act of terror is, do they think that this was a lone wolf attack, or do they think it was part of a larger ring or a larger plot?
Yeah, so right now authorities believe that he acted alone. Police actually found a journal on him when they found him, and it lays out the plans for these bombings and includes references to Al-Qaeda and ISIS, but it really suggests that he was really ISIS-inspired and kind of self-radicalized. However, how he actually made these pipe bombs and pressure cooker bombs, the instructions and ingredients can easily be found online. And since most of them didn't really go off, authorities don't believe he was really an expert or trained. However, they're looking into who he visited while abroad and if that is connected to this at all.
So what does his future look like if he's tried and then if he's convicted of these bombings? What happens to him next?
Yeah, so once he's out of the hospital, he's going to be taken to a federal court in Manhattan, and there he's facing a series of charges, including 5 counts of attempted murder of law enforcement officers, using weapons of mass destruction, and he also is facing several federal terrorism charges, and there's going to be more charges to come. So currently he's being held on a $5.2 billion bail. If he's convicted, he's looking at life in prison. But what we're really looking at is just a long and complex case that's going to involve a lot of state, federal, and local jurisdictions.
Sarah, thank you very much for joining us. Islamophobia is defined as the dislike of or prejudice against Islam and Muslims, especially as a political force. It's become a dominant force in the 2016 election, where violence and terrorism are coupled together with Islam in many foreign policy debates. But how accurate are these depictions of Islam, and what has been the effect on Muslims in America and around the world? Talking Points international correspondent Elijah Shama is here to help sort it out. Elijah, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So in terms of when we talk about Islamophobia, is this just another post-9/11 reality that people adjust to?
Well, it's interesting because the term Islamophobia is really a post-9/11 term, but before that it was just called Orientalism, and it's not a recent thing. If we look at, there was a study done that showed that the New York Times over 25 years has painted Islam in a worse light than cancer, cocaine, and alcohol abuse. So this isn't something that's kind of just developed now, but 9/11 really has spurred it on.
So in terms of Islamophobia in the United States, are there moments when it tends to spike?
Yes, definitely. When we look at election seasons, when we look at debates, anytime there's been a debate, there's been a spike in hate crimes related to Islam. Anytime there's been a presidential candidate that has said anti-Islamic statements, we see increases. It's really dependent on whether there's any kind of catalyst, so to speak. If we look again at terrorist attacks, anytime there's a terrorist attack, just Muslim communities all over the world kind of feel the brunt of this.
And so it's important to note that Islam, like most religions, is made up of a variety of sects. Mm-hmm. Are there certain sects that feel the brunt of this Islamophobia?
Well, it's interesting because the majority of Muslims are Sunni. But Shia are also getting a lot of the heat for this. But one of my favorite statistics when I was looking at this was that people mainly are just getting attacked because they have religions that maybe look Middle Eastern or resemble Middle Eastern religions. Hindus, Sikhs, Persians, Baha'is, all of these people feel the brunt of Islamophobia, and they're not even Muslims.
So in our final 30 seconds, one argument that we hear is that Islam as a religion is inherently violent. Is that true?
It is not true. The term jihad is used often as kind of the verification for this, but jihad is mainly used in defense of one's religion. and defense against polytheism. So anytime someone's fighting against you. But that's actually the lesser jihad. The greater jihad is actually fighting your own battle to make yourself better in the eyes of God. And I think that's what's gotten mixed up.
Elijah Shama, thank you for joining us. When we come back, a look on a moment of political courage. Don't go away.
Your daughter just had her first breakup. Do you A, put yourself in her shoes? B, console her?
Don't worry, sweetie. This is gonna happen a lot.
Or C, find her a new boyfriend?
Nice, single boys. That was weird.
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
Well, Thomas, you've got prediabetes. But with more exercise and a change in diet, it can be reversed.
I've tried exercising. It just makes me hungry for bacon.
I love bacon, too. And who really likes to exercise?
Not me.
Me neither.
Nobody. So we're good?
What? Oh, you still have prediabetes. Big time.
This past Sunday was the Emmy Awards. Among the nominees was the HBO movie All the Way, a chronicle of Lyndon Johnson's efforts to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964. LBJ's passage of that law over strong opposition from his fellow Southern Democrats is rightly looked at as a moment of political courage. He himself said after the bill was signed that he feared Democrats had lost the South for a generation. Tonight, however, I'd like to take a look at a less well-known example of political courage from LBJ's son-in-law, Virginia Senator Chuck Robb. In 1996, the Senate passed the Defense of Marriage Act 85-14, federally defining marriage as between a man and a woman. A majority of Democrats, including liberal stalwarts such as Tom Harkin, Barbara Mikulski, and Joe Biden, all voted for the bill. Those that opposed largely couched their concerns in politically expedient ways, constitutional concerns such as federal versus state powers. Senator Robb, however, gave an eloquent floor speech in which he laid out his view that the bill was discriminatory, saying that, quote, when that civil institution is separated from a religious ceremony and that civil institution is recognized by a sovereign state, then denying federal recognition of that union amounts to nothing short of indefensible discrimination. And, quote, discomfort over sexual orientation does not give us the right to discriminate against a class of Americans. It's hard to overstate how risky of a vote Senator Robb cast. He was the only senator from the former Confederacy to vote against the bill. His and my home state of Virginia was, in 1996, still a deeply conservative state that hadn't voted for a Democratic presidential candidate in over 30 years. His colleagues begged him not to make this speech, saying it would be devastating to him politically. Indeed, he lost his race for re-election in 2000. But as he said in his speech, quoting from LBJ, it's not hard to do what's right, it's hard to know what's right. He knew it was right, and he took a stand, ready to deal with whatever consequences would come. It's easy to be cynical about politics. It's easy to see elected officials contorting themselves to avoid taking any sort of position at all. But although there are those who act in that manner, throughout our history there have always been men like Chuck Robb who believed it was his duty not to cast the popular vote, but the right vote, and who stood by the downtrodden minority in the face of overwhelming opposition and political fallout. And that's all we have for tonight. I'm Alex Amico. Have a great night, Syracuse.